So to make a long story really brief, what I found was in one of the most obscure and ancient of the texts, a book called the Sefer Yetzirah.
What is that?
We today in modern science, we talk about life as the result of elements, and we describe elements through word and through number. So we have the periodic table, for example, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon makes up the DNA of our bodies. Those are the words, and for every one of those words, there are a lot of numbers that may be applied. There are 17 different numeric parameters that go with each of those. It's in the monasteries, in the nunneries, where many of these texts are preserved, and they've been largely forgotten.
It's really amazing texts.
Well, they are. So as I began my search, my thinking was, if we could really pin down our origins, you know, the science, the best science of the 21st century is now overturning so many of Darwin's ideas. And by the way, Darwin was open to that. He was willing for his ideas to fall. He viewed them as stepping stones toward greater understandings. So Darwin was okay with that. And I began to see a connection in the texts that was not accounted for in the theories of evolution. And it is a connection that is very controversial today. Now, Darwin didn't have access to the tools and the technology. He certainly didn't have the DNA databases that we have today. So this is where I began. Part of my job in software development was in writing pattern recognition software. And I've searched patterns ever since I was a kid.
So you applied it to this?
Sure, it comes very naturally for me. I used to look at patterns on, flashing patterns on blinking lights on Christmas trees, and I mean, you see them everywhere. So I thought, if there are patterns in nature, and we are nature, they should show up in our DNA. And it was in the 80s when the DNA databases, we could actually begin to access them without being part of the research projects. So to make a long story really brief, what I found was in one of the most obscure and ancient of the texts, a book called the Sefer Yetzirah.
What is that?
It is a Hebrew text that has only been translated a couple of times, of a couple of authors, into English. It's so mysterious, George, that very few scholars even want to talk about it because they don't know what to say about it. It's a brief text. It's only about 2,000 lines.
All right.
And it is written as if an observer were present the day that the Creator created humankind, step by step. However, it's written in a language that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Is it like Genesis or totally different?
It's very different from Genesis. I think Genesis probably partially derived from this text, the Sefer Yetzirah, which is the book of creation. It literally translates to the book of creation. So it was as if someone were watching the Creator actually create the first person.
Doing what he did.
Doing what he did, but it is not written scientifically. The bottom line to what the text is saying is that through language, humankind was created. And that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Explain that.
If you take it literally. But as I began to follow the instructions as the author created them in this text, and this, George, to me, this is the power of transcending the boundaries between science and spirituality. Because if a scientist only looked at the elements of life, you'd never make this discovery. If you only look at the spiritual text, you would never make this discovery. But it's by blending the two together and allowing them to tell the story. So we today in modern science, we talk about life as the result of elements, and we describe elements through word and through number. So we have the periodic table, for example, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon makes up the DNA of our bodies. Those are the words. And for every one of those words, there are a lot of numbers that may be applied. There are 17 different numeric parameters that go with each of those. So put that aside. When you go back into the ancient text and the Sefer Yetzirah specifically, they did exactly the same thing. They talked about the power of the letters of very specific alphabets. Now, it doesn't make a lot of sense to modern scholars until we begin to understand that every ancient alphabet, bar none, that I have found so far, has always from day one with each letter had a number, a mysterious number associated with the letters. We don't know where the numbers came from. They never change.
A code?
It's a unique numeric code The study of that code is called gematria, and it was actually formalized. The laws, 32 laws of gematria, were formed in the 2nd century. They were formalized in the 2nd century. And the only way gematria works is you cannot deviate from these laws. There are specific laws that apply to the numbers. So our ancestors were also talking about life using words and numbers. So they had the letters of the alphabets and this mysterious number. We're using the periodic table. We've got a whole bunch of numbers.
Right.
My job was to find out which of those numbers equates to the numbers in the ancient alphabets. And if I could do that, my thinking was, it would be possible to look at human DNA, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and different combinations of that, and substitute the ancient letters for the numbers based upon this correlation. This, in retrospect, it was simple, but not knowing that, it took years.
Right.
It took me 12 years.
And did you break it?
To find what we now know is that the atomic mass of the elements, the numbers of the atomic mass, are the numbers that equate to the mysterious letters in the ancient alphabets. What that means is when you look at human DNA, or the DNA of any life, it is made of hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, and using gematria, the numbers that equate to those become 1, 5, 6, and 3. 3 is with the carbon. And when you then take a table, one of the ancient tables, and you're able to correlate those numbers with the letters, what we find, George, is that the human DNA is our genome is built in layers. And at the top layer, it's like every book has an introduction. The introduction in every cell of every form of life, carbon-based DNA, the introduction is the same. And the first translation literally reads, literal, God eternal within the body. God eternal within the body. And God that is depicted in the DNA is actually spelled the way that the name of God was spelled in the ancient text before it was removed 6,800 times. In the Torah, for example, the sacred name of God is believed to be so sacred it cannot be written in its entirety.
Why put it in a code?
You know, this was, so first as a scientist, what I have to say is this. People say, why is the code there?
Yeah.
And I say, I don't know. All I know is that when I followed the instructions in a 3,000-year-old text and I applied it to the periodic table, this is what we have.
Yeah.
Next question, is it a coincidence? So
there are no coincidences.
I had a statistician run the numbers for me, and the odds of this happening by chance are 1 to 234,256. So 234,256 to 1, or the or 0.00041%.
Right.
Those are the odds that it's just
random.
Just random. Now, those aren't astronomical odds. I thought it might be like 1 to a bajillion, you know. But when you take into account,
they're still high.
Not only is the language there, but when you take into account what the words say, that those words actually have meaning, God eternal within the body.
And they all say that.
The first letter in all human DNA, if you can look at what's called the genetic code, CTAG, every one of those is made up of combinations of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen. Right. And they are arranged, I don't want to be really technical when I talk about this, but they're arranged different numbers of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen atoms. So within each of the DNA bases that make our DNA as it is, there are different combinations of CTAG that break down the different combinations of God eternal within the body. And the God within our cells, within our DNA, is literally the same spelling of the God that was taken from those texts. Now here's the beauty, I just have to say this.
All right.
My first fear was I found it in the Hebrew language, and I said, does that mean, could it actually be divisive if it only is found in one language? And when the research went to its fruition, what we found is it is in Hebrew and Aramaic and Sanskrit, 3 of the root languages.
The same thing.
Exactly the same thing. So in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Sanskrit, the code for those letters translates precisely the same in the human DNA. That's the first layer. It begins with human DNA once again. And this is a very precise kind of human DNA. It comes from umbilical cords of newborns because that DNA is what's called very pristine DNA. It hasn't been eroded over time, as happens as we mature in life. So it's a very pristine kind of DNA. And the DNA is isolated in one vessel, and that is encased in another vessel to make sure that there are no other influences that are happening from outside to influence the DNA. So here is the experiment. This very unique DNA is now placed within the range of the field of a human heart that we described in an earlier episode. Every human heart, if you recall, has a field of energy that extends beyond the physical heart for a distance between 5 to 8 feet. And that field, it is an electrical and a magnetic field that we can measure with conventional equipment. So the question is, through that field, is the DNA influenced by the emotions of another person? Can our emotions actually influence the DNA in our bodies? Before I tell you the experiment, let me just share a little bit about why this is important. Human DNA, when it is in our cells, it is coiled in very specific kinds of ways. And what scientists have found is that in the presence of certain emotions that we would call negative emotions, and I don't really like to use that term, but I'm going to use it to be clear on what we're talking about. So when we talk about emotions, for example, of anger or hate or jealousy or rage or frustration, those that we would typically consider as negative emotions, they have an effect on the DNA within our bodies. And the effect is that in the presence of those emotions, the DNA is actually, the coil is tightened. It's tightened like a little knot. And that's important because when it is tightened in this way, the DNA does not express to its fullest capacity. So the negative emotions tighten the coil and prevent the DNA from expressing the fullest capacity of whatever it is that it is expressing, whether it's our immune response or our anti-aging hormones or whatever it is. The DNA simply cannot do its full complement of what it's designed to do. So from this description, you can probably imagine what the positive emotions do. Positive emotions actually loosen the DNA. They relax the DNA. So these are the emotions of compassion, gratitude, appreciation, for example. Those kinds of emotions actually relax the DNA within our bodies and allow that fullest expression. Knowing this, the scientists wanted to see what effect human emotion from one person would have upon DNA that's not in that person's body, but it's in this special container that was designed. So that's the experiment. Here's what they found. The human DNA was isolated, and in the presence of the positive emotions, in the presence of the gratitude, appreciation, love, and compassion, what happened was the DNA actually began to relax, and it relaxed so much that it began to unwind itself. The two coils began to unwind as if the DNA was about to replicate itself and produce a new strand of DNA in the presence of positive emotion. All that was happening was gratitude, appreciation, care, compassion, and the DNA was responding in such a positive manner that the DNA acted, again, as if it was about to reproduce itself in a new, vitalized, healed state. So this is something that scientists were not expecting. So now we've seen the results of these two experiments. In the presence of the positive emotion, the DNA is relaxed. In the presence of negative emotions, such as anger, hate, jealousy, rage, the DNA was tightened like a little knot. It coiled up very, very tightly. And this is telling the scientists something that we've never seen demonstrated under laboratory conditions before. Anecdotally, it may have been suspected, but this is the first time in a laboratory environment that we could actually see human emotion intentionally created by those trained to create very specific kinds and very specific qualities of emotion. That human emotion changed the shape of the DNA.